Good evening all, and welcome. Thank you to everyone who's gone over to check out Forge Fiction and see the book that we're writing together. There are currently 3 days to submit your version of Chapter 1, so if you're an aspiring writer and would love to help me build up this fantastic book, feel free to check it out. But hurry! After the 3 days, voting will commence, and it will be up to you guys to see which chapter is your favorite, and then decide. But anyway, for now guys, it's time for all of you to get comfortable. Ensure you have your hiking boots ready, because it's time to let the darkness take control. 3 years ago, I was hunting in Namaji State Forest in Minnesota. If you know anything about this area, there are wetlands everywhere. Swamps and sinkholes litter the land. It's like nothing I've ever seen. This land is tough and mean, and if you go in unplanned and do not mark your way, there's a good chance no one will ever see you again, as it was a foggy morning and the second week of deer opener, and I was trailing along. I had my rifle across my chest, with both hands on the scope, and just trying to find an area where I could see more than 10 feet in front of me. The further in, I realized I was lost, and then the "oh shit" set in as I walked a little further ahead, trying to get my bearing, and before I knew it, I stepped forward and sunk. I was up to my forehead in mud, and sinking, with my only anchor being my rifle butt and barrel, and just so happened to be wider than the sinkhole I managed to get myself in. My only hope was to pull myself out, and I tried for 4.5 hours screaming my lungs off for help, and trying in vain to pull myself out. But every time I would pull, my rifle would sink lower and lower, jumping up and yelling to get a breath of air, then submerged in mud and sludge. After 5 hours, I came to terms that I was not going to get out. I was going to die in a sinkhole, and no one would ever find me. I just thought about my wife and my mum, and how much it was going to hurt them to never find my body, and go the rest of their lives without knowing what happened to me. I thought of my 2 girls, and how I'd wasted my life on a hunting trip, and that I was never going to be there for them anymore. And at that point, I probably looked like Leonardo DiCaprio from The Revenant, crawling through the snow. I was cursing and praying and cursing more, using my last bit of energy to get out. I thought, if I'm gonna die, I'm gonna make damn sure I exuberate every fiber of my being before I entomb myself in this literal hellhole. Again, no luck. And out of nowhere, this feeling of euphoria just rushed through my body. I was sad but happy at the same time, and understood it was my time to go, and my body was broken. I was beginning to feel hypothermia set in, and out of nowhere, I felt these 2 pair of hands grab mine that was still clenched to my rifle, and I slowly started getting pulled out of the sinkhole. A father and a son had tracked a deer they shot to within 5 feet of where I sank, and to this day, that deer has made me feel like a god is out there, and it was my guardian angel where it ended its life, and I was reborn, and given a second chance. After a week at the hospital recovering from dehydration hypothermia, and the ass-kicking I gave myself, I walked out there promising myself I'll never take a second for granted. It's made me a better father to my children, and a better man. I truly believe that. I still wake up at night, screaming with rage I had, trying to pull myself up, sinking deeper and deeper covered in sweat, with my heart pounding. And when I do, I go check on my now 3 girls, and just think how lucky I am to still be alive. And lastly, I have given up hunting, or even going into the deep woods. Maybe one day I will try my luck, but every time I think about it, I just start shaking. Even writing this has me in tears. On a side note, A man from the Twin Cities this last hunting season disappeared in the very same area I was hunting. Look it up if you don't believe me. Every time I would see his face on the news or in the paper, I can just imagine him in my head, struggling to get out. But unfortunately for him and his family, he has not been found. The only reason I am still here today was my rifle and how I held it across my chest. On October 21st, 2017, I was visiting my grandparents in Oklahoma. They live out in the country deep in the woods, and I have spent my whole life climbing over every inch of those woods. I've memorized every trail that I have made while walking through them. I have a favorite spot in the woods. It's a small clearing with giant 5 to 12 feet boulders all around it. It's a place that is very special to me, but although I can't explain it, whenever I go there I have the weirdest feelings, like someone or something is watching me, or just a weird feeling in general. But I've always ignored the feeling until that day. I woke up that morning ready to go and just be out in the woods for a day, to do some fishing and maybe some target practice with my BB guns. I took my phone so that I could film my favorite spot, so that I could show my friends. I have been planning to have them out there for a couple of days. To get to my favorite spot, I have to go down into a ravine and then go up the other side. I started to make my way down the ravine, but at the bottom I noticed something strange. There were bones everywhere at the bottom. Deer heads, deer legs, possum skulls, and a ton of bones in general. That was not totally unusual, because my uncle who hunts would usually dump the bones of deer everywhere, and the family dog, Buck, would also catch and kill possums, armadillos, and raccoons. So I ignored the bones and started to make my way to my favorite spot. After about 10 minutes of walking, I finally got up there and set down my stuff, and pulled out my phone to record the area I was at. I started recording and talking to the phone, gesturing to my favorite areas and whatever. I then started to walk just a little ways to show more of the place. I was walking when I noticed a little stone structure in another clearing. I had been out there the day before, and the structure had not been there. So I walked over and found myself in the center of a circle ring of rocks. I started to rotate when all of a sudden the woods stopped. I don't mean just birds, but the crunch of my boot on the ground, the wind, and even my own breathing. Everything just stopped. But then I heard the weirdest thing. It was like my name was being whispered over and over again. And as I look around to see where the sound was coming from, I focused on one tree. There, peeking out from behind it, was a tall, slim creature. It was completely black. Long arms, a long neck. But when I say it was black, it was all black. No other colors, like shadow black. And from what I could tell, it had no facial features and at least reached 7 feet tall. But the weirdest part, it had no legs. It was a floating black torso with long arms and a long neck and no face. My usual fight or flight response is usually fight, but in this situation, something in my head told me that I would not be able to fight this. I turned and I sprinted out of that spot. I ran, and I did not look back once. When I got to my grandparents' house, I immediately locked the doors and windows, or at least as many as I could, and tried to send the video I recorded to my friends. But as I did so, my phone screen went blood red, then glitched and shut off. I tried 2 or 3 more times, but the same thing happened. My grandma had walked in and asked me what I was doing and why I looked so worried. I just played it off and said that I couldn't get a message to send, which was not entirely untrue. I was not able to sleep that night, and I swear I could hear the faintest whisper of my name all night. I've never shown my family the video or told them about the incident. I've only shown that video to some best friends, and only 2 of them believed me. I've told the others about it, but no one really thinks it's true. I've been back out to my grandparents since then, but have not gone back near that particular spot without another person. I've had the misfortune of coming across a few scary guys in my life. My friends will say I'm a weirdo magnet, so I'm pretty wary and clued up, now that I'm a bit older. But when I was a teenager, I suppose you could say I was very naive. Back when I was 20, and my family, my mother and little sister, had moved from a small rural village in the Shires to a town down south. It was a huge change, and as I had been having a difficult time, I welcomed the change of scenery. It was a beautiful town, in an affluent part of the country, but I struggled to find a job, and became very frustrated as my mum needed a bit of help with money. Over the course of 3 months, we became fairly friendly with a middle-aged guy who owned a takeaway shop in town. I will call him Phil. If ever he saw us doing some shopping, he would come and chat, and ask how the family were, and he genuinely seemed like a decent, caring bloke. So when he said he might have a job for me in his shop, with a small flat upstairs that I could rent for next to nothing, I thought, okay, great. Things might be looking up. Bill got our address from my mum and said that he would pop by early evening and, when he had finished, take me in the car and go to see the flat. I got myself looking fairly casual but presentable, and I'm feeling excited and confident, thinking, wow, a new job, and a flat. I've killed 2 birds with 1 stone here. I just need to show him I'm sophisticated and would make a great employee. Around 8 p.m, he knocks on the front door, and Mum answers. He tells her we'll probably only be gone about half an hour, and he'll have me back home safe and sound. Now, I didn't take my phone with me, as I had no credit to call out, and didn't think that I would be needing it for a quick trip up the road and back. In hindsight, a pretty stupid thing to do. Maybe if I had my phone on me, it would have deterred him from doing what he was about to do. It's already dark as it's March. I get into his car, and we start driving, and he's chatting away and asking how I am, and telling me what the flat is like. When within a matter of a few minutes, I've noticed that we're not taking the conventional route that takes us directly into town. At first I think he's taking me down some shortcut, round the town to get to it quickly, and I reason with myself that he knows the area well, and I do not. 30 seconds later after that, I realise that he is taking me in the complete opposite direction, and I can tell that we are driving away from the populated town, and into an area where trees swamp both sides of the road. My brain is now working overtime, thinking where the hell is this guy taking me? And I just about to manage to keep my composure and ask him outright, where are we going? Town's back the other way. I just thought it would be nice to take you on a little tour. It's beautiful here, many forests and beautiful places. I would love to show you, he tells me in his normal, cheery tone. I wasn't capable of saying anything at that moment, because the logical and the reasoning side of my brain were at full-blown war. I'm trying to keep calm, thinking, okay, he seems fairly normal. Why wouldn't he want to show me around? It is a stunning area full of natural beauty. He's probably proud to show me where he lives. The logical side, however, disagreed, and a wave of panic overcomes me, and a little voice enters my head and shouts, "What's in the dark? No, you're stupid." So I just sit there in silence, taking in the scenery, which is becoming more sinister by the second, because at that moment in time, I didn't know what to think, All I know is every cell in my body is screaming at me to find a way out of this situation. I started looking for a signpost, houses, any distinctive landmarks, ditches, huge trees, anything that I would be able to use to recognize my way back if I had to bolt from his car. Phil can obviously sense I'm nervous, so is just talking away at me about what the job is like and how his staff are friendly. And before I know it, he has slowed down to a crawl and has turned down a little mud road with a dense tree line on one side and pitch black open field on the other. My stomach literally drops, and my body contemplates power vomiting all over his car, because the reality of what is potentially about to happen hits me like a freight train. I'm thinking to myself, if I jump out of here, I have to be able to run over muddy fields into literally nowhere. But my imagination starts rather helpfully flashing by images of him grabbing me before I get a chance to get out of the door. So I sit there, buckled in the passenger seat, not saying a word. I just think to myself, if he attacks me, don't make a sound and don't give him the satisfaction of showing I'm scared. My brain was about as useful as a chocolate teapot, and I was starting to get angry with myself for not doing something, but I was terrified. We come out at the top of this little dirt road, and there is a tiny little car park surrounded by woodlands with one car sat in it. It's clear that the people in there were doing it. As he pulls near the car, I realize that he has brought me to a local dogging spot. He turns to me, puts his hand on my knee, and says, "We should do what they are doing," with a deadly serious expression on his face. I make this bizarre, half-nervous laugh, half-garbled high-pitched whine, and try to laugh off the suggestion to show I'm not into it and super uncomfortable right now. The alarmed expression on his face at my gurgled cackle, which sounded like I've swallowed a potato, whole clearly freaks him out, and I'm mentally congratulating myself for my socially awkward and grossly unsexy reaction. It'll be fun. No one will see us, he persists. No, I don't want to. Plus, I'm kind of seeing someone right now. I lie. But he sits there just smiling at me, like a Cheshire cat, like I'm going to miraculously change my mind at the sight of his weird face. Mum will be expecting me home now, I tell him after an insanely uncomfortable 30 seconds more, as I try my hardest not to make eye contact. I'm sure she won't mind you being out a bit longer with me. You can trust me, you know, he tells me with a straight face, as we sit next to the sex wagon parked next to us. I sharply pull my leg away from his grip and tell him again, Mum is waiting for me, and she will start panicking if I'm not home in the next few minutes. Take me home. I look him straight in the face, and he knows that I'm not messing around. Okay, that's fine. I'll take you back now. Without another word, he drives me out of that creepy, seedy place and back home. My finger is hovering over the seatbelt button, ready to jump out. As we pull up outside our home, I breathe a sigh of relief, and I can see my safety literally a few feet away. And before he can stop me, I mount and slam the door behind me. As I'm stepping over a tiny little rope fence around our garden, he gets out of his car, and my heart starts to sink. I think I'll pop in and see your mum quickly, he tells me, and I swear I can see a smirk on his face, but I know he's only doing this to freak me out, knowing damn well I'm gonna tell her. He was trying to delay the inevitable, or scare me into keeping my mouth shut. Before I can try and talk him out of it, Mum has heard us pull up and opened the front door. I barge past her with one thought on my mind. I head straight into the kitchen, grab a small knife out of the drawer, and fly into my little sister's room like a madwoman. "Don't you dare leave this room, no matter what you hear," I say to her. Seeing the knife I've stuffed up my sleeve, she looks at me with panic in her eyes and whispers back, "Okay." I walk back down into the living room, and the cheeky twat is on the sofa, sprawled out, comfortable as hell like he's at home. I see red, and swear to God I felt like the Hulk. I am ready for this bastard. I awkwardly perch myself on the arm of the sofa Mum is sitting on, the absolute furthest away from him I can manage, as he just sits there, making small talk with Mum about how she is finding the area. Are the neighbours friendly? All the while, keeping his beady little weasel eyes on my every move. "Why don't you come and sit over next to me?" He pats on the sofa cushion next to him. "No, I'm all right here, thanks," I tell him, as I'm fidgeting with my sleeve, trying to stop the little knife from falling out in front of him. "Why are you sat over there? Come, honestly, I won't bite." He laughs and pats the seat next to him again. "No, I'm quite comfortable here. Thank you very much." This time, through gritted teeth. My mum, bless her, is looking at us during this back and forth like a tennis match, and I can see something is registering in her eyes. She can see my behaviour is all off. I've got one bum cheek weirdly perched on the sofa arm, so I'm half stood up, half sat down, and I'm fiddling about with my sleeve. I'm twitchy as hell and staring my mum in the face intensely, mentally trying to speak to her through the power of telepathy alone. I must have looked like a nutter. "It's getting late now, so I think you should go," she finally speaks. Mum is starting to look anxious now, as she has finally twigged on that something has happened. Phil gets up, agrees, and mumbles something about having to check about his shop. When he walks by me and is nearly out the room, he pauses and turns to me to shake my hand. I'm thinking to myself, what a weird thing to do. I take the opportunity to kindly offer him the hand that had the knife, taking it a bit more with force than is polite to, and he soon yanked his grubby mitt out of mine when the tip of the knife blade had jabbed him. He looked down, saw the blade, and looked at me. I looked at him with such disgust. Phil hightailed it out of home as fast as he could without a word. A prick for a prick. I told my mum everything, and she was fuming. We did discuss going to the police, but there wasn't really a crime committed on his part, aside from being a major creep. Sadly, when I mentioned to a couple of girls my age who lived down our street, they clammed up and shot each other a strange look. I guess he had probably done this type of thing before. We moved away from that area after, so I'm glad I never have to see his smug face again. It was a chilly December morning. I hiked down pre-dawn, taking about an hour and a half to go 3 miles off the beaten trails. I got to my nests about a half hour before sunrise and started to settle in. The wind kicked up and a fog rolled in that was thicker than milk. Within a few minutes, my visibility was 5 feet. I'm sitting tight, huddled up against the freezing wind, when I start to hear twigs snapping close to me. For no apparent reason, what is normally a rapturous sound, indicative of an imminently successful hunt, sent a frosty chill down my spine. I chambered around into my lever action 30-30 as quietly as I could, and lay flat on my back, tucked against a fallen tree. The rustling was moving closer through the fog, but I couldn't see anything. The sun was starting to peek over the mountains to the east, and visibility was starting to increase. The rustling of twigs and leaves was sporadic, sometimes directly in front of me, sometimes behind or beside me, and I remember laying there, rifle across my chest, thinking to myself how silly it would be to react like such a coward. I rationed with myself that bears and mountain lions are a rarity to see where I was, and I had likely stumbled into a herd of whitetails that had bedded down. I decided to sit up. The rustling stopped immediately. It was fully dawn by now. I was looking through the fog for the outline of my prey, which I had assured myself was literally all around me. It wasn't. Seemingly nothing was. By now the fog had faded away, and it was apparent to me that I was alone in those woods. I hunted all day without seeing so much as a squirrel. Around 3 in the afternoon, after fighting the wind in an abnormally cold day, and not wanting to hike up by flashlight, I decided it was time to make it back to the truck. Walking out of those woods was the most uneasy I have ever felt. Lawfully, once you make it back onto the trail, you're supposed to clear the chamber of your rifle. Not that day. What is normally a stroll through the woods, I undertook with the seriousness of an animal being stalked. I would walk, then stop, then listen. I never heard or saw anything during my retreat, but I could feel eyes on me. I was about 100 feet away from my truck when I rounded the last corner and saw, hanging at eye level from a tree, a noose, a stuffed bear in a blaze orange jacket. I'm a giant, broad-shouldered outdoorsman, but that one shook me something fierce. This story happened in summer of 2005, when I was 14 years old. I grew up in a village near Munich in southern Germany. It was maybe the safest and most peaceful place on earth. As a few young families fleeing the stupid rents in the city, and a few elderly couples. Close to my parents' house, there is a little nature reservation, maybe around 2 to 3 kilometers in size, with a forest and a few little lakes. The entrance isn't forbidden, but there's no path leading deeper into the area, and it can be quite overgrown and wet, so normally nobody would go deep inside. However, I've always had an affinity for the wild and natural places like that, especially as I was allowed to play outside and alone. I soon started exploring it, and it became my favorite playground. One day, I was around 9. I found a small clearing deep within the forest, covered by a flower meadow. In late summer, it just looked like paradise itself. Over the next years, I came there whenever I wanted to be alone, when I needed time for reading, dreaming, and drawing. And when I grew older, also sunbathing and other stuff. During all the time, I never told anyone about it, and I never saw a single sign of other people there. The meadow was my secret, and I felt as safe as I did at home. Years later, I went back just for some reading and sunbathing at the meadow, and since I never saw anyone else there, I mostly stayed topless while doing so. As when I woke up, I saw an old 50-year-old man sitting directly behind me. He was maybe 1 meter 8 in height, dressed in light outdoor clothing, and had a camera around his neck. I got the shock of my life, and yelled and tried to somehow cover myself, but all my clothes were out of reach, and all I could do was press myself to the ground. He himself was just sitting there looking at me, and told me how beautiful I was, and glad he got to see me again. I asked him to turn around and allow me to get my clothes, but he said, "No, you don't really need to be ashamed. I just want to chat for a bit." The man told me about his life and asked casual questions. Where do you live? What's your name? How's school going? What about the boys? And stuff like that. At first I answered a bit monosyllabically, hoping that he would leave me alone, but he clearly had no intention to do so. After a few minutes, he even asked if I would allow him to shoot some more pictures, because I looked like a nymph. and he would like to preserve me forever. Of course, I refused, and now something changed in his behavior. His whole appearance became harder, and he said with a creepy and cold voice, and I'll never forget this sentence, "You are really stupid for a naked little girl all alone in the forest." At this point, I became scared as hell, jumped up and ran into the forest, leaving all my stuff behind. He didn't try to follow me, but was just sitting there and laughed. I came back after lurking for about 2 hours to get my stuff. He was gone, and left most things behind, except for my shirt and bikini top. I grabbed all my stuff, tried to cover myself with my skirt, and ran home as fast as I could. I never told my parents, but after that, I never visited the meadow again. And to the creepy old man who destroyed my paradise, please, let's never meet again. I'm not a hunter, but when I was around 14 or 15, I went with my cousins and brother to go check out some land my cousin's family friend bought to fish on. The land was a good few acres and located right next to their very large suburban neighborhood in Georgia. All you need to do was pull onto a curb in the neighborhood and take a small dirt path across a lake, and after a small turn, the path ran about a mile in a straight line down the middle of the property to a larger lake. When we went, we took a golf cart since nobody wanted to walk and pulled onto the property. After taking the small turn on the left onto the main path, we all just froze. Walking towards us at the opposite end of the path, there was a man with a jacket and a ski mask on. We all saw him. He wasn't holding anything, he wasn't running, and he wasn't speaking. We stopped the golf cart, but we couldn't turn around on the path since it was so thin, and there was foliage to both sides of us. The person was still at least a half a mile down the path, just walking, but we were still terrified. Also, it didn't help that the oldest in our group was 16 and the driver was 12. Despite being young, however, my cousin put the golf cart in reverse, which makes the loudest high-pitched whine ever, and reversed the entire quarter-mile pedal to the metal, which is pathetically slow in an electric golf cart. When we told his parents, all of the adults came out with us to look over, as well as set up 2 plot watchers. They had to see if they spotted anything. There was nothing on the cameras, and they still have never seen anyone in those woods since then, despite hunting there all the time. My dad spent 10 years logging in old-growth forests in the Pacific Northwest. His own personal scary experiences amount to leaning up against a tree taking a break when a mountain lion staunted into view. My dad waves his hand and says, "Hey cat," and it froze and tore off into the bushes. But a logger friend was driving home through the logging roads one night, late with his buddy, when all of a sudden a light enveloped them and shook their whole truck. They pulled off to the side of the road as far as they could and waited, scared to death. But it was gone, and they never saw it again. Another logging friend was finishing with another guy deep in the forest by a river after a fresh rain. There are kinds of little sandbanks in the river where stands of small trees and grass grow up on them. They waded into the river and onto the sandbanks when the rain started up again. Just then, the first guy stopped in his tracks and started, called his friend over, and there was a fresh giant footprint in the sand, larger than any of their size 14 or so feet, at least twice over, being erased as they looked at it in the rain. It had to have been made in the 15 minutes or so between the rain showers, My dad was engaged for a while to an Indian woman. She remembers being a little girl and her grandmother showing up where X, wherever the native word for Sasquatch is, has gone up into the hillside. Something had torn it way up into the hill, tearing young trees and plants aside viciously. The wreckage was huge. My stepsister's uncle was a hunter, like so many others in the state. He gave me my first guitar, and is sadly passed away now. He chose a time when we were camping, and my back was to the forest, to tell us about the one time when he was hunting. He came back to a tree break where a natural meadow was formed in the mountains. He decided to crouch on the edge for a moment and use his binoculars to scan the far tree line. Just then, a foul stench hit him in the face. He lowered the binoculars and shook his head to clear the smell. Then out of the middle of the meadow, a shape began to take focus, as it stood up on two legs. There, he thought. He raised up the binoculars to see the back side of something very, very large, making its way quickly out of the meadow on two legs, stinking up the whole place. I shudder to still think of that. My mum grew up way out in the Olympic National Forest with 4 younger sisters. One night they were driving home through the woods where their engine began sputtering and dying. My mum, who was driving, got it going again, and they stopped at a gas station to call her parents, to tell them that they were having some car troubles. They all got out of the gas station and were astonished when the car turned on behind them, with no one in it. I have no idea why they got back in after that, but I'm guessing their house wasn't too far away. My mum looked in the rear-view mirror and saw what she described as a football-shaped object, all lit around the borders by bright lights, following them at treetop level. All 4 of her sisters saw it too. When they finally turned on their road, it was lost to sight amongst the trees. On top of all of that, they heard from around the town that other people's engines were having problems that same night. My mum and my aunts are the least imaginative people I know. There is no one less likely to see things or make up stories. Another time when my mum was a teenager, she had 2 roommates, and their local church asked them if a woman had come to town could stay the night with them, and they agreed. In the middle of the night, they heard a strange low mumbling coming from the bathroom. The way my mum remembers it, they peeked into the bathroom, and the woman was inside chanting, and a demonic face was peering back from the mirror. They booked it into the bedroom, and were so scared they opened the windows and piled out over to a neighbour's. Again, not the kind of people who make these things up. My cousin and I were sitting in a hot tub, gazing up at the night sky, when all of a sudden, a bright green arc spread across the sky. Off-center was a giant green blob. We were frozen in fear, staring. I was ready to bolt inside the house, but my cousin wanted to stay out to see what it was. Then it blinked at us, and moved in a zigzag pattern. That was enough for me, and I leapt out and ran into the house, babbling to my aunts about the sky and the lights. My one aunt said, "Oh, she reads too much." "Thanks, Aunt Linda." But my cousin, who saw it with me, has an impeccable record and backed me up. Apparently, though, many strange things have been seen in the sky, in East Wenatchee. The last thing that happened to me was in Wenatchee too. Years later at my aunt's house, which is right next to a cemetery on one side, a really big apple orchard on the second, hills on the third, and the subdivision on the last. It was winter and the orchard was filled with snow. My cousins and I went out into the snow under the moon to play hide and seek in the orchard. About 15 of us charged out there, deep into the orchard, and who gets the frickin' short straw to seek first but me? So I waited and counted about 2 minutes and then set off. It was really spooky, but I was excited. All the trees looked so dark and knobbly. The light of the moon was nearly gone under the branches. Instead of zigzagging around, I went straight through and found myself on the far side of the orchard, almost in the open. I turned back when I heard a voice say, "Over here." I laughed and said, "Nicky?" There was only an old building there, no house, and really nothing to see, so I was confused. The voice was high and clear like a young girl's, and said over and over, "Come here, closer, closer." I took a few hesitant steps towards it, then fear washed over me, and I just bolted back into the orchard calling for my cousins. Everyone came out all concerned, and they must have seen how scared I was, because everyone got scared, and we all fled back to my aunt's house, where I again was branded the one who reads. In the daylight, I went back, thinking there must have been a house or windows that I was hearing, maybe a TV or something. Nope, just a building. Not a scary one, but there was nothing there, and nowhere I could have been hearing the voice in front of me coaxing me closer. About 8 years ago, we went to a friend's condo in the city. They were a bit of an odd couple, but very nice and brilliant. The guy wanted us to borrow this book on spiritual nature, and said that it was really good. I don't like things like that, so I flipped through the book and something felt off. So I told my husband I didn't really want to take it. We said thanks, but no thanks, and left without it. About 3 months later, we needed to use our spare tire, and lifted up the floorboards covering it in the trunk section of our SUV. There was the book. Oh, hell no. I've heard and never believed of the stories of books that wouldn't be gotten rid of, so we threw it in the trash, and I was really ready to burn the crap out of it if it popped up again. Thankfully, it seemed to stay there. My husband was really freaked out and pissed about that. It was easily the most unexplainable thing that's happened to me personally. Most of this all happened a long time ago, so I've forgotten the finer details, but it all adds to the argument that there are unexplained things in this world. This happened about 15 years ago back in Mexico. Me and my dad, along with some friends, were out in the woods gathering firewood. An old dirt road used mainly by cattle and ranchers. No other traffic that far out. 10 minutes later, this nice new truck with tinted windows coming from the opposite direction stops about 25 feet in front of my dad's truck. We could hear somebody crying in the truck. Most likely a woman, but I'm unsure. But me being 10 didn't think much about it, and continued to grab fallen branches. The truck just stopped, but no one left the vehicle. My dad told us that was enough for the day, and it was getting dark. All the older guys in the group seemed to know something was up, and jumped in the truck in a hurry. I even got my finger smashed on the door because of it. But again, I didn't think much of it aside from my finger getting bloodied. I remember my dad driving fast. They talked and murmured, but it was grown-ups talk to me, and all I could think about was the finger and the pain. When I got back to the town, my dad pounded a few beers and they talked. Several years later, when I was in my early 20s, that memory came back, and I connected the dots to what we'd witnessed. I'd never felt so much fear in my life before. To this day, the scariest thing that ever happened to me is that. I don't have the guts to bring it up to my dad, but I'm pretty sure it was some sort of cartel-related deal. But for some reason they decided we didn't see anything. Also, this is because back in the day and in my area, you never really heard of crime like that. The only crime was cartel on cartel, super secretive crime. So I'm sure that whoever was inside probably had something to do with them. If it was cartel related at all, that is. There's a good chance it could have been something else entirely. But I can only imagine what my dad felt, having me and his friends with him there, and seeing something that we were not supposed to see. It could have gone terribly wrong for all of us. This is something that happened to me and a friend as kids, and is more of a disturbing discovery than a disturbing person. We were probably between 11 to 14 at the time, and it was in the middle of summer. It was also something I didn't really come to understand until much later in life, when there was no way to resolve what he and I had seen. My house was in a valley. There were a few houses along the streets with it, but the hills on either side were undeveloped forest back then. Me and my friend would hike up the hill behind my house, through a few miles of woods, and out to the other side where there was a neighborhood that had a farm stand style shop with local honey and a bunch of cheap candy. We also just hung out in the woods a lot and would tell each other scary stories as we headed back home. None of them were all that scary looking back on it, the ones I can remember anyway. But younger me was always a little spooked on the walk back to the house. One dusk when we were heading back for the day, I spotted a bit of white in a mound of moss. As a kid, I was always looking for interesting stuff to collect and take home, so I was immediately ready to go and dig out the moss. When I did, I found a pelvis bone. It had probably been there a long time, and I remember it was pockmarked and dirty, worn away slightly from time. I was pretty scared for a second, but I remembered that all sorts of animals have pelvis bones, and this one must be from a deer or something. In my childish need to know it all, and jumping at my first non-frightening possibility, I told my friend it was a deer pelvis. He marvelled at it, but put it back because I knew my dad would be mad if I brought back old deer bone. I forgot about it for a long time. Many years went by, but eventually I learnt more about the shape of human bones opposed to animals. I remember the shape I found quite clearly. It was almost certainly a human bone, and the size wouldn't have been an adult. I wonder what else was in the mound, who it might have been, and if my finding could have given someone some closure. I went back to look for it twice, thinking I might remember the part of the woods it had been in, but I never found it again. Me and my friends were going through this trail at night, in a very dense forest. Everyone went quiet for literally no reason. I asked what was wrong, and everyone said they just felt strange, like something bad was about to happen. It sure did, because I stopped in the middle of the road, just at the very edge of the darkness where my lights were. A very weird figure began to run from one side to the other. It was not human. I will say that, just because it didn't look like someone running. It was a shadowy figure, and it ran across in a very fluid motion. I don't know if my eyes were playing tricks on me, but I asked my friends and they said they all saw it. Now here's the most stupid thing I ever did as a skeptic of the paranormal. I got out my car, immediately, complete silence. No birds, nothing. It's pitch black. I hear a crumple of leaves in the distance, so I got my phone's flashlight out and pointed it in that direction. What I saw next, I have nightmares about, and I rarely talk about it. It was absolutely just something that shouldn't have happened. I saw an arm around a tree in the distance. It wasn't human, at all. Then it disappeared. I said nothing, and couldn't feel anything. I casually walked back to the car and didn't say a word to my friends. I put my foot down as fast as possible, got on a main road and connected up with the motorway. My friends asked me what happened multiple times. I pulled into a service station, turned back and just said, I saw an arm wrapped around a tree that wasn't human. We hardly talk about it, and it is the creepiest thing ever. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's stories. I do love me some stories from deep in the woods, always chilling and spooky. If you liked the video, please be sure to hit that like button. It helps me more than you know, and it proves that you made it to the end of the video, which is an achievement in itself. Also, you can press the subscribe button. It's a magical button that goes along with its complementary bell button. When pressed together, magical things happen, and you receive notifications every time I post every night. Oh, and comment too. I also like it when you do that. It really helps me out. If there's a story that you would like to share, feel free to send it to my Reddit or my email. I look forward to reading your experiences. But please, remember that paragraphs, punctuation, and description are your friends. Use them regularly and wisely. But anyway, for now guys, it's time for me to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.